As far as I know, there's not a lot of private channeling going on. If there is, I haven't been invited to it. So
we use a lot of private channels.
There we go. There we go.
I was just gonna say, you opened yourself right up.
Haven't made the
Todd
cut
Clint.
on that one. There we go. Okay. Well, how embarrassing for me.
We usually call them not Todd.
Yeah, everybody but
Everyone
Todd.
but Todd. All right, everybody. Welcome to September 17th episode of Asked in Praxis. We are going to talk about Microsoft Teams channels, which to use when, and I guess we have some enthusiasm for this topic today, so let's get right into it. Gang is all here. And as I said, Microsoft Teams channels, which to use when. So we'll start with what are channels in Teams. We will talk about the types of Teams channels. We will also get into a little bit of when you should use each different type. And Mr. Mark Anderson has some tips from the trenches, although I think all of us probably have been in these Teams channels trenches at one time or another. So, we'll try to cover all that. All right, Mark, let's kick us off with what are channels in Teams?
All righty. Well, there's a picture on the right side showing some of our teams and how we have channels set up so that you can see that there is variation on these things. So essentially, they're a way to take a group of people who work on some, that's a team of people, and break up their work into separate chunks. So it might be, in this case, we've run collab days for multiple years, so we have a channel per year. In other cases, you might have a channel per topic or per sub-team or per project phase or something. It's a very flexible way to just sort of subdivide what a team does into some logical boundaries. Many teams only use the general channel, and that's totally fine. If you've got a group of 3 people, having 15 channels would probably not make a lot of sense. That would just make things very confusing unless the 3 of you decide that that's a helpful way to go. Each channel can have its own set of tabs. So that's really helpful for context switching. You might have, say you have a human resources team and you've got subgroups in there, one that works with benefits and one that works with payroll. Well, the tabs that they would want to see in their channel are probably different. They might have a tab for a different library. They might have a tab for a different tool that they use to do that subset of work. And then the files that belong to each channel end up in a folder in the backing SharePoint site. If you have Microsoft Teams, and I've found that even to this day, some people don't realize this. If you have Microsoft Teams and you've set up a Microsoft team, you have a SharePoint site in the background. If you're not a SharePoint person, you may never go there. But when you click on that Files tab, you're actually seeing the files that are in a folder in the Documents library in that underlying SharePoint site. So that's a useful thing to know, because that folder can end up containing lots of interesting stuff that is sort of a grab bag of things that you've mentioned in conversations that you've uploaded for your channel that you've shared with people within your team. That's what channels are to me.
I think that's a darn good definition. All right, let's move on. Derek, can you get us started?
Yep. So we're going to go into each one of these with a little bit more depth, but there are essentially 3 different types of channels that you can have inside of a team. The first is called a standard channel. And this is really just a tool that you use for open collaboration with a group of people, like Mark was saying. We sort of use the team concept. Could be a project, could be whatever, a department, doesn't really matter. We can also create a private channel. This is more used for private collaboration, as the name implies, but it's always a subset of the team in which it is part of. And lastly, there's this concept of a shared channel, which is, again, for private collaboration, but the sort of use case for this is both to share access between teams internally and or communicate with external vendors. Now, for those of us that are consultants and we're in like 15 different tenants, changing tenants is painful and hard sometimes, all the time. But if you're working with one vendor many times, a shared channel could be a way for you to like federate with them and then actually create a working collaboration space.
It used to be worse, so I don't
Yes.
ever complain about switching tenants anymore, because I'm like, I was there when you really couldn't do it. Now it's just sometimes painful. Gets a lot of. I think the worst part about switching teams is that you switch into a different account, and then that is guests in many things. So it's like, wait, which account am I in? Okay, and then I have that toggle again to like the various places where that account is then a guest. That it can be a little confusing. So
does it still
and of
hang
course
you up?
notifications don't work. What?
Does it still hang you up if you're on a meeting when you switch tenants? It's been a while since I've
No,
played
it
that
does
game.
not.
No, it does
Oh,
not.
thank
And
goodness.
that was a
Thank
huge
goodness.
fix. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
huge fix. Yep,
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, that was a big thing. And I mean, we've done other Ask and Praxis about tenant switching and multi-tenant stuff.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I wanted to include this chart because this is a really great chart from learn.microsoft.com that sort of outlines what you can do in each one of these types of channels and who can have access to them and what some of the rules are. So, specifically one that keeps coming up for me is if you have a private channel, who can be a member of it? And you can see here that it is limited to the subset of the team. So if you're not a member of the team, you can't be part of the private channel in the team. But I'll let folks sort of dive deeper into this in the individual talks.
And we
if we want to
linked
talk
it in the
about
resources.
Yeah, we want to go to the next one. So I'm going to talk about standard channels. And essentially, as the name implies, these are sort of the default, right? These are just the general sort of, folders inside of Teams. They can be created by depending on the settings of the team, because you can restrict who can and can't create channels in a team. But by default, any member or owner of a team can create a standard channel. This channel inherits the permissions of the team. So that means that any member of the team can see the content, they can edit the content because every member of a team has contribute access. So if you have a team and you add a new channel, anybody in the team can edit any documents in that Files tab. This includes things like conversations, posting, threads, sharing files, collaborating on documents, co-authoring, scheduling meetings. If you want to be able to schedule a meeting inside of a channel, you can do that as well. If you want to add tabs or different apps to that, either out of the box or third-party ones. And you can also mention in the chat both the channel and the team. They sort of do the same thing because every member of the team is a member of the channel.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's a little weird. It does help. It does help specify the content a little bit more. So you can mention the contracts channel so that you know that we're talking about a contract. Mm-hmm. Now there's a typo in that item, but
I fixed it.
Oh, thank you. But just a little sort of tip or trick. This is something that a lot of my clients, when they're working with teams, they get a little confused about, is that every standard channel essentially 100% creates a folder in the SharePoint Sites document library, in the shared documents document library. So it's really just a folder, and hence why if you have access to it, everybody has access. Generally, we use standard channels or channels in general anytime we need to set up a conversation around a specific topic. As Mark was saying earlier, a phase of a project or a specific type of work. All right, I think I'm done.
Cool. In the chat, Mark just mentioned something pretty important, that tags can be a useful way to subdivide team members into subgroups to @mention them. And that is a really good point that we don't have on the slides, but it's definitely a good way that you can sort of, we were sort of saying that channel @mentioning the team or the channel kind of just gets you the same people, but it does provide visual context of what you're trying to like draw attention to. But using those tags gives you a bit more control about who you're actually mentioning. Okay, moving over to private channels, Todd.
Yes, so we all know about standard channels now. Derek learned us up on those pretty well. But what are these private channels that we keep hearing about? So these are also channels inside of your team, but they are a subset of the membership of the team. So like Derek said, when you create a new standard channel, it inherits the permissions from the team. So everybody can see all of the standard channels. Private channels are a subset of that. They have their own permission model. And so anybody can create one, a member or an owner can create one. This is for a group of people that want to talk about a subset of a topic. So an example might be if you've got a project, there might be a subset of people who want to talk about the budget or resourcing or something like that. This would be a way to do that without cluttering up all of the regular discussion and keeping some of the details private. So some people can't get into that private group and see them. We talked a little bit about you have to be, well, and I guess I talked about this, you have to be a member of the team already. So this is always a subset. You can't invite anybody from outside of the team. There's also no facility for switching between a standard channel and a private channel. So if you created a budgeting shared standard channel and then decided, well, maybe we don't need everybody to see this, we can't convert that to a private channel. You have to create those very deliberately. So be careful when you create your private channels that you know that that's always going to be a private channel because you can't convert it back. Mark touched on this a little bit when he talked about the SharePoint site behind a channel in the teams, is when you create a team, you create a SharePoint, or not a SharePoint. When you create a team, you create a Microsoft 365 group, and that group has a bunch of things. One of those things is a SharePoint site, but one of those things is an email alias and exchange. One of those things is a planner plan. There's a bunch of other things. You don't get those with a private channel. There's no group, so there's no group stuff that comes with that. You can share out of these things the same way that you do out of regular things. When you create this, you don't get a group, but you do get a SharePoint site because that's where the files are stored. And since it is a different security model, it can't use the folder inside of the shared documents library. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, I can break permissions on this folder. Why doesn't it just do that? Because an owner can be excluded from a private channel. So if you did that with a regular SharePoint folder, the owner could go in and give themselves permission to it. So this is a separate SharePoint site completely. It's got an ID of team channel. So it's like team channel #0 or team channel #1. As an admin, one of the things that I don't like about these is that they're not very easily discoverable. That SharePoint site is one way where you can discover private channels. If you see these team channel SharePoint sites popping up with PNP or whatever, you can get to them that way. You can see that they're there, but otherwise they're very tough to discover. And one very helpful bit of information is at the tenant level, you can disable private channels. So do with that what you will. But if you go into the Teams admin center and go under Teams policies, there's just a toggle switch that says allow private channels or not. And that is a tenant-wide setting. You can't set that at the team level. It's my experience, and I haven't played with these a lot in the chat room. Julie was talking a little bit how we're kind of cobbler's children when it comes to this kind of stuff because we're a small organization. So sometimes the formality of things just doesn't make sense for our size of group. As far as I know, there's not a lot of private channeling going on. If there is, I haven't been invited to it. So
we use a lot of private channels. So.
There we go. I
was just gonna say you opened yourself right up.
Haven't made the cut on that one. There we go. Okay. Well, how embarrassing for me.
We usually call them not Todd.
Yeah, everybody but
Everyone
Todd.
but Todd. Yeah.
Oh, geez. So they can be a lot of trouble to maintain. The administration is tough on them. So, beware when you're using private channels. They might be more trouble than they're worth. Unless you want to talk about me then they're great.
Yeah, then they're perfect. Yeah. No. I think that's a really good point, because the administration tools for knowing you have those private channel sites is not very robust. I think, as you pointed out, there's PowerShell stuff that you can go find them and whatever, but it's not like a thing that an admin can do through the UI to see what is out there and whatever. And so it's a concern. I think it's something to at least be aware of. I mean, a lot of people in the chat are commenting that they hate the fact that it creates that private site, and I do too. I think that was totally the wrong architecture, and I would have much preferred that they would have broken inheritance on a document library in the site that goes with the team, and that way the owners would still have control of those. So the team owners would still have control of those document libraries, but then the files would have gone in to that and would have only the members of the private channel as part of them. I feel like that would have been a better architecture, but water under the bridge now. There's not a ton that we can do to change that.
I do want to mention, Carol brought up a thing that I meant to mention, but I forgot. So in the chat room, she said, I've never come up with a really good scenario for a private channel that couldn't be addressed with a different team or site. And I think that's a really, really good comment. In most cases, whenever I've been with a client and we've tried to talk about private channels and they said, well, what should we use this? My gut always tells me, if you're thinking about a private channel, maybe just a new team is a better solution from the administration standpoint and just keeping track of everything. So Carol, thanks for reminding me of that. I meant to say that and forgot.
Yeah, and there's definitely a conversation going on about that in the chat, but I'm not going to read it all out here. All right, so moving forward to shared channels. So this is something that I ended up talking about a lot because I do a presentation with friend of Simpraxis, Bob German, around multi-tenant configuration. And so shared channels comes up because it's one of the security paradigms of multi-tenant integration, in that shared channels, if you are going to use them with external people, so people not in your tenant or not licensed in your tenant, you need to set up B2B direct connect with that other tenant where you're going to share the information. That is done through a UI, actually, in the Azure Entra ID area where you go set up B2B Direct Connect. It's finicky. I'm going to say that. You set it and you're like, okay, try it now. And they're like, still doesn't work. And you're like, but it's all the right settings. And then you wait, and eventually you're like, okay, change it on your side. Okay, change it on my side. Okay, no, it should be right. It should be right. We're looking at the same thing. And then eventually it just starts working. So it's one of those very finicky, I think there's timer jobs or something that are running to make it available. And so sometimes they don't work as fast as you'd want them to, and you think you got it set up, and then you end up changing things thinking you got it wrong when you just needed to wait longer. But then you wait longer and it still doesn't work. So then you start changing things. So it's like one of those tricky to set up things. I've done it twice now. It didn't go smoothly either time, but we did eventually get it set up both times. So one of the powerful things here is people can be added to this channel without adding them to the team. So this is, we just talked about the external users, but also internal users. So you can go and say, if you have a finance team and you have a budgeting for HR benefits, maybe you want to invite some of the members of the HR team into that channel in your finance site so that you can discuss that. That's a way that you can add members of that external, internal members of your tenant, but external to that team. You can get them into that shared channel and thereby collaborate with them without them having to be a member of the team. So that is a powerful thing. The team name and the channel show up in the user's home tenant. So when you were talking about external users, so if I'm a member of one of my clients' shared channels and they share it with me as a Simpraxis, with my Simpraxis user ID, then in my own Simpraxis Teams instance, in my org, I see the name of the team with the channel they shared with me right under it. And I can see all the chats in there and interact with it. And so there's no tenant switching when I want to interact with that channel. So where I think this is very significantly powerful is if you want to have a place where you can collaborate with external users, but you're not going to include them in many, many teams. This is a good way to do that kind of sharing. So if it's like a one-off channel, which has been the scenarios where I've used it before, it's like, we just need a place because we're going to constantly communicate with each other and we want to silo it to make it really easy for us to work together, but you're not trying to be a guest user in a bunch of different teams. Then I think this maybe wouldn't work as well, because then you'd end up with all those teams with all those channels like in your set of home tenant teams. So it might get a little overwhelming and weird to deal with. But for certainly one or maybe even two, I think it's a really good use case. It does also have a dedicated SharePoint site similar to the private channels. And of course, that is because there is that security boundary of it's a different set of users. And so they needed to silo the security of that. And the way that Microsoft chose to do that was by having a separate site. All right, so that's all I have to share about shared channels. So now we've kind of gone through all the different kinds of channels and sort of their, what they each have that are sort of unique to them. But Mark, did you have some tips from the trenches? And certainly if anybody else has something, I'll try to monitor their chat and we'll bring those tips.
Yeah, there are some good questions in there if you want to.
I was going to say there are some questions there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This is actually a picture of me working on a project that we recently did. I'm down.
He's the one up top watching the guy work. That's Mark up top.
Oh, that's Todd in the trench. That's true. All right. So I think you heard some messaging, but if it was too subtle, use private channels mindfully. There are some drawbacks to using them that we at Simpraxis at least believe that it sort of takes away some of the joy of rolling them out. The biggest one for me is that you cannot have information architecture in that private channel, meaning content types from the content type hub and site columns, without there's a PowerShell trick to make that happen, but it's sort of prevented by default. And that tells me that kind of site that the private channel uses is not really intended for anything very sophisticated. And I love sophistication. Shared channels, there's that inter-organization federation, which it's often out of bounds. We've talked about it a little bit in the chat. The security people, the white blood cells come running out immediately when you start talking about federating between tenants. So that can be a tough sell. If your organization is game to really dovetail with another organization because you collaborate a lot, it's a great mechanism. I haven't seen a single instance where the security people have allowed it to happen. Todd, I think, mentioned that, or Derek mentioned that you can't switch from one type of channel to another. So if you create a channel, that's what you got. You can't turn it into something else. You could get rid of it and add a new one. But there also is a little bit of weird stuff that happens if you try to reuse the same name for a channel that already existed. So the names of your channels actually sort of matter, and you can't switch them from one type to another. If you've teamified a SharePoint site, meaning you started with the SharePoint site and you click the link that connects it to Microsoft Teams, and you're not seeing your documents under the Files tab when you look in, say, the General channel or any other channel that you've created, it's probably because you've got stuff stored in the Documents library, not in the folders that belong to the channels. So one thing to think about is that each channel gets its folder in the Document library. That's cool, but people also use the Documents library for other stuff. So it becomes this real grab bag. It's not a perfect situation. So you want to think about how you want your files to be parsed out. Other questions, Julie?
I was going to say, Mark,
on the chat.
Mark, I've seen that last, especially where they had been using an existing SharePoint site.
Yeah.
And everything ends up in the root of the documents. That's, then they switch over to Teams and they're like, where did everything go? And they freak out. I've seen that quite a few times.
So Casper has his hand up. I'll let him go, and then there are some questions in the chat. Go ahead,
Let
Casper.
him go. Go,
Yeah,
Casper,
I was
go.
just wondering if you're going to address the issue when we're dealing with governance and teams. If you set up a governance policy that some of them automatically expires, how private and shared channels play into that?
I don't know. How did they play into that, Casper?
Well, so I think it looks like Casper knows. He's testing us. The expiration stuff is at the group level, not at the teams level. So stuff like private channels would not expire because they don't have a group, but the other ones would because they have the group that actually does the expiration, not teams.
Yeah, but
Right.
it's a mess basically.
Another
Yeah.
reason not to use private channels.
There are. I've seen quite a few people talk about orphaned private channels out on the interwebs. When you do remove the team, sometimes the private channels end up getting stuck out there, and there's no visibility into them. The content's still in there.
It sounds like maybe this is part of what Casper is bringing up, is
Yeah,
that maybe the expiration date of the group has caused everything else to go, but those private channels get abandoned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
don't
that's
think
sort of what I was.
Yeah, the Velcro isn't strong enough to hold them together.
Yeah, and this is sort of what I was alluding to before, is that there is no good UI from an admin perspective to see these things. You have to run PowerShell and monitor that in some way, and it's not a great answer. Not a great answer at all.
You can see the fact that the private channels exist in the active sites listing, but it's a separate thing. And sometimes if they're orphaned, you can't see them at all, which is
That's
not good.
what I'm,
Yeah,
that's essentially
exactly
what I'm getting
that.
at. They're
Yeah.
not tied together. Like there's no visual way to go, oh, these all belong together. Or
The Velcro problem, I'm telling you.
So Igor asked, so no way to use shared channels with non-Microsoft external users. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, no, I can't come up with a way that you could make that work. And if you did, it would probably be a hack. So I'm going to just flat out say no on that, because it's not something you can set up with B2B Connect. So, yeah. Let me see. Did anybody else see any other questions that we should answer? I was sort of hanging out on that one.
You can of course assuming that all of your settings allow it, you can add a guest user to a team as a member. So that is often a totally adequate thing to do instead of even thinking about the shared channels.
Yeah, but I think he was saying like, oh, if I have a shared channel where I want to break that security paradigm,
absolutely,
but now I want that, that person to be essentially what would amount to a guest user. It's not really not really possible.
Agreed.
Members don't need to be a part of the team, but not if the team is a private channel.
That one got answered.
Okay.
All
right.
Yeah. If you want a shared channel, any member of the private channel, any member of a private channel needs to be a member of the parent team.
Oh, okay. All right.
Shared channels can have members that are not members of the parent team.
Right.
Okay. Any other? There's a lot of stuff in this chat. Wow.
Yeah.
We struck a nerve.
Can you add existing guest users to a shared channel, Julie?
No. As we just said, they're not considered. Oh, well.
A shared channel?
Yeah, actually, I don't know. That's a really darn good question. You might be able to. I don't want to answer that. You can't. They wouldn't see it. They wouldn't see it in their own tenant. That for sure, because of what we were just talking about with the B2B Connect. So if they were already an existing guest member, you might be able to, but they would have to switch into your tenant org, right, in Teams to see it. So actually, probably. But I haven't tested it, so let's, with the caveat that
with a grain of salt.
I haven't tested it. Yeah, with a grain of salt.
To Carol's comment earlier about like other use cases for that, this isn't a great use case for it. So I go with your no private channel stance on that too. But I'm working with a client that sets up 2 channels per site build that we're working on them with. One for, the business users to be able to interact, and one just for the consultants and IT, so that if they're asking things that are deviating from our standards a bit, and how do we manage this as we go along, we have that sort of off chat and then reply back to them in that other channel, which works for permissions wise and privacy, but certainly makes it hard to manage who you're talking to and where to reply and all the things. So
that sounds fraught, that you're going to end up putting it in the wrong channel.
Right. It's a lot of overhead. It gets the job done, but it's certainly not an easy way to work. So
that's like back channeling during a meeting.
But I would be very afraid that I ended up in the wrong group chat.
For sure. Yep.
And I was actually just going to say in the chat, for me, it sounds like the bottom line is on both private and shared, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, Carol, I totally agree with that. I think you need to take them all with a grain of salt, and you have to, go back to that chart that's from Learn. And it's like, do I just absolutely need to have this? Like, is this so critical that I can't solve it any other way? It feels almost like that, because the administration, the long-term effects could be pretty negative.
Yep.
All right. Well, we got to 1 o'clock. There's our resources. You can click on those. Those will be linked in the show notes later. And so coming up October 1st, we're going to dive into Microsoft 365 storage, moving the Space Needle. This has been something that we've been addressing a lot with our clients lately. A little Microsoft Redmond reference there for anybody who missed it, a little pun. So this is going to just definitely dive into the storage conversation and some changes that have been made recently. So we'll go into that. Join us live. Mark and I will be at Experts Live in New York City on October 10th. And then the following week, Collab Days New England. Yay!
A month from today.
And just as a little teaser, if you're here now, you'll know it. October 17th is an Ask and Praxis Day, and we will do an Ask and Praxis anything on that day. So if you have, we'll be doing it from the Microsoft MTC in Burlington. And so if you have questions or whatever, absolutely get those to us and we will address them ahead of time. We have a form that SIMPinfo Ask and Praxis. There's a form there. You can submit your questions ahead of time and we will get those answered. Patrick and Mark are going to be speaking at Collab Days New England, so that's exciting. And if you're in the New England area and you want to join us, we would love to have you. Registration is open. And then finally, Mark and I will be at TechCon 365 in Dallas in November, and we have a code SimPraxis to get $100 off registration if you are in that area and would like to join us. All right, thanks everybody. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.